We're now live, Chair.
Right, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee. The first thing I would like to do actually is bring item 10 after we've formalised the minutes after item 4. That's because we've got the people from Kirklees who kindly came and did a summary of our audit service, and it's their report which so that they're not hung about for a while going through our day-to-day stuff.
Councillor Evans, Councillor Baines has just fallen from the meeting. Would you just like to take over chair until he returns?
Yes, sorry. Okay, I was just grabbing my pen. I think that Councillor Baines was saying that we were going to have item 10 after item 4. Is that correct? Can I just confirm that? Thank you. Okay, so do we have any substitutes nominated for this afternoon, this evening?
None received and no apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Mission of the public. It's not recommended the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the items on the business for this particular agenda. So we can proceed as we are. Members' interests. Can I remind members the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests that have in relation to the items included on this agenda, either now or certainly at the time when they come up. Does anybody have any interests they wish to note at this point? Don't think I can see anybody coming up with that, so we'll progress to item 4, minutes of the committee meeting on the 29th of November 2021 to be agreed as a correct record and signed by the chair. Do we have any comments in terms of the minutes of the meeting which you would have received? Does anybody wish to modify or alter anything? Again, I'm not seeing any comments on there. So would somebody like to propose we accept those minutes, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to propose it.
Thank you, James. And I think I saw...
I'm happy to second, Chair.
Officer,
wasn't there, I can second it.
You can second it. Thank you very much. So seconded. All those in favour of accepting the meeting minutes as an accurate measure of the meeting? Thank you. So I believe that we're moving on to item 10, and we have colleagues from Kirklees to take us through the audit service PSAS compliance assessment. Who I'm not sure who that will be, but would they like to speak up, please?
Yes, Chair. Good evening to everyone. So my name is Martin Durnley, and one of my colleagues, Philip Taylor, is here tonight as well. Philip did part of the work, and I did the other part. So I'm here to present to you, if that's all right.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I don't propose to present at any length because of the fact that you've already got a copy of the report, and I think that your head of internal audit, Lisa Hinchliffe, has already told you about basically the purpose of the process. But just to sort of quickly run through, so there are some international audit standards for internal audit which are prepared by the Institute of Internal Auditors, an American organisation, and then CITFA, the local authority audit organisation, accountancy organisation for the UK, has the sort of has the role of creating a set of standards that are translations, and those are called the public sector internal audit standards. And the accounts and audit regulations require that authorities take those matters into account in operating their internal audit functions. Part of the international standard and the national standard is that every 5 years you have to have, well, you should have a regular assessments by your head of internal audit, and every 5 years you have to have an independent assessment. And there are two ways of doing this. You can pay somebody to do it, or you can join a mutual club of sort of like-minded organisations, and they can carry out peer appraisals effectively of their peers, and there is a subgroup of West and South Yorkshire auditors, of which us and yourselves are part, along with Rotherham, Doncaster are the other two authorities principally, and we are therefore all reviewing ourselves at this time. So the methodology which we used the heads of internal audit's own self-assessment against the SIPFA standards, and then went to the trouble of trying to verify the information by a review of some key documents, such as the Internal Audit Charter and your annual audit reports, by interviewing various people, such as the chair of the committee, Mr. Baines, one of your service directors, the other Mr. Baines, Ian Baines, and Mr. Broadbent, the Chief Finance Officer. So then Philip went through in more depth of a number of service files which are shown in the report, and he spoke with the auditors who did that work as well. So that was the methodology of our appraisal. So three-pronged attack essentially: something to do with the core documentation, something by interview, and something by a mixture of interview and written material. And there are three levels of standard that we evaluate, or the standard allows you to evaluate against: something that conforms, something that partially conforms, and something that does not conform. But interestingly enough, the SIPFA standard does say that partially conforms is an acceptable level of standard. So the 6 areas we looked at are the mission of internal audit, the definition of internal audit, the core principles of internal audit, the compliance with the code of ethics, the assessment of attribute standards, and which are things like purpose, authority, responsibility, and independence, and the performance standards, which are things like the work, the way that the work is prepared, the way it's reported and generally communicated back to clients. It then looks a little more at level of resources and at training. Though in principle, level of resources is a matter for the audit committee and the organisation's management, not for the public sector internal audit standards. So I'm pleased to tell you that our assessment reached the conclusion that you did conform with the standards in all areas. And some core observations are that the head of internal audit, Ms. Inchliff, and the audit team are all very well respected and seen and viewed as constructive and proactive. There's a high level of satisfaction with their work. They contribute to the role of you as audit committee by providing you with reliable and timely information, and your arrangements for follow-up are perceived as robust and effective. So I think that's probably a fairly strong accolade. So you do confirm in relation to all the aspects, but there are a number of recommendations, almost nice to have things. They're listed there in the recommendations with 7 subsets, but there are things about presenting the chart to senior management, an annual report that could more overtly state independence, that whether your head of internal audit should have their appraisal reviewed by the chief executive and the chair. That's a sort of international audit standard fallback, really, which doesn't necessarily fit awfully well in local authorities. It technically goes as far as the fact that you shouldn't be allowed to dismiss the head of internal audit without the conversation with the chair. And then the standard also requires that or suggests that there should be a formal appraisal of all audit team members. That's something which doesn't necessarily fit in Calderdale's HR strategy, I understand. So they have there's regular one-to-ones that are documented. That's part of the standard, an extremely good piece of standard. But the standard that is mentioned does talk about annual appraisals. There might be something beneficial for, in some cases, a cross-checking that all the work is rechecked to be sure that it absolutely achieves all the objectives. There's a recommendation that you might like to prioritize recommendations, and finally, a recommendation that you might like to do some kind of summary of conclusions. I'm not sure that Lisa necessarily agrees with all those recommendations. They come out of the standard, but I wouldn't say that they are by any means essential at all. So that's it, really, Chair. All the activity appears to comply as far as Philip and I can conclude. So I'm happy to take questions or anything that the members of the committee may wish.
Thank you very much, and Martin, and much appreciated. But I believe that our chair, Councillor Baines, is available again would you like to pick up there, Councillor Baines, and carry on with the meeting?
Yes, please, Ashley. Thanks.
Okay.
I was back in time to hear your report, Martin, from the start. So,
Thank you, Chair.
sorry about that. Are there any questions or comments from? Yes, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested in, and thank you very much, Martin, for running the rule over us. I was interested in the comments that you made about CPD, the particular question of performance appraisal, and I like the idea that internal audit should have a regular session with leader and chief executive. I think that's part of the checks and balances. And I do wonder if perhaps you or Phil might have been slightly misled by the name that we give to the appraisal process in Calderdale, which is shared conversations. It's a very sort of soft name, and it's not necessarily always clear, I think, to external viewers that shared conversations is, in fact, it is a proper formal performance appraisal process, really. And I wondered if you were suggesting something in addition to that. I couldn't quite work out from the paperwork. I think Lisa was saying I couldn't decide what was additional and what you would be satisfied with in terms of your recommendations. If you could say a bit more about that. Thank you.
Is that okay? Is that okay, Chair, to answer directly to Councillor Scullion? Yes, I mean, it's an absolutely fair point. I think the standard slightly bizarrely talks about annual appraisal, and I understand the shared conversations is more of a sort of monthly one-to-one type activity, or at least a more frequent one. So it is slightly odd that we're sort of picking up something, and I suppose it's really about whether the shared conversations have that set piece content that you might expect an annual one to do. In some respects, they are probably substitutes for each other. So we mention it because it's listed in the standard. The standard doesn't put forward alternatives, but I think it is fair to say that the existing arrangement is probably fine if that's what you're all very happy with. And you do have to recognise that that Calderdale's audit team are 10 people in an authority employing 3,000 people, so they can't expect to be fundamentally different to anybody else in the rest of the council. So it's almost easier for yourselves, I think, if you actually follow your standard procedure. You have got a form of appraisal there, so I don't. Hence our comment that we just raised it as an issue. But I think the existing arrangements are probably fine. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Any other questions or observations? Yes, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation. It's about the item that was given as an example in the brief presentation. This is on Appendix A, item 3. It's on page 82. And I'm not sure what our response to that was. It looks like there's a work in progress message there or something similar. So it's not a question for Martin so much as for ourselves. Lisa, what's our response to that item 3?
Yes, Councillor, I can confirm what the response is. It was a working draft at the time. We have confirmed that we do have regular meetings with the chief exec, but I'm going to formalise that so that we do have regular meetings in the calendar to formally address that item.
Thank you.
Right. Any other comments or observations? No. It's well. Okay. Well, that we accept the report and actually thank Martin and Phil for the work that they've done on our behalf. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. It was a great pleasure to work with. Well, we've known Lisa of old, of course, but it was a great pleasure to meet up with one or two people like yourself and Mr. Broadbent and things like that. So it was quite pleasant to have a little chat with you all. And And yeah, it was interesting, and it's always good for us to prepare ourselves for next time when we get reviewed by Doncaster in this time next year. So
yeah, right. Okay.
And could I thank the members of staff, Chair? Could I just take the opportunity to thank the staff involved for making the audit so straightforward?
Yes,
Lisa's
yes.
staff, Andrew Metcalf, Ashley Stewart, and Elizabeth Wardman. It must have been quite an experience for them having their work cross-examined and being asked about all aspects of their job. But all three of them were very open and honest and came across very well. So they were a credit to the service. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay. Cheers.
thank you, Chair, and thanks to Lisa and to all of you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
Good night.
Martin. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Right, so we'll move on to item 5. Martin, are you introducing this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, the report tonight, which is brought to the Audit Committee, is a third of the Directorate Risk Register reviews, which are brought to Audit Committee for members to review and challenge the risk registers, and also consider where the risks potentially are within the different services. Clearly, the pandemic has severely affected education over the last 2 years, with several lockdowns and also difficulties in homeschooling, and also an increase in the number of people, or children rather, who require care or moving into care. So it's been, for 2 years, it's been a very, very difficult time for education in some areas. This has resulted in an increase in pressure both on resources and budgets, as identified within the risk register. But it's obviously not been an easy time. So if I could say that the Director of Children and Young People's Services here today, tonight, to actually provide any further information you might require, or answer any questions. If that's, thank you.
Right, thank you, Martin. Did you want to make any comments at this point, Julie, or do you just want to see if there's any questions for you?
I'm quite happy to do either, Councillor Baines. Like, do you want me to just say a couple of words?
Yes, yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Yeah, just to set out that there are 3 major risks in our risk register that you've got in front of you this evening. We do review these regularly in my management meeting, because obviously things can change quite quickly. We have identified another risk that we are going to include on the risk register, and that is the recruitment and retention of staff that is becoming challenging across children's services, but particularly in the social work teams. Managing risk for us is like a day-to-day business because of child protection. So our risk register covers those very high-level risks, because the day-to-day case management risks is undertaken in the service to try and keep young people safe as we can in the borough. Just to let you know what sits beneath the risk register, we do have a self-evaluation framework that we complete every year. And then we have a number of strategic plans for looked after children. And just around the placement risk, we do have a sufficiency plan as well that analyses our placements, what our future need is going to be, and identifying areas of work to address that for the future. So it's just to let Audit Committee know what sits underneath. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Julie. Are there any questions or observations? Yes, Ashley. You're on silent, Ashley.
My apologies. Thanks to Julia. I think you may have answered the question I've noted. You made specific reference there, I think, to the risk register as well, Julie. Does that cover the aspects of the sort of vulnerability and abuse in home? Because obviously in this report there is an important reference to the mental health issues coming from the COVID situation and so on. Does your comment cover the issue also of vulnerability and abuse in home as far as this risk is concerned?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, Councillor Evans.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that's what you were referring to. Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Martin, did you want to?
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. Hello, Julie. I'm Martin Townsend, the independent or recently recruited independent member of the committee. Just in case you're wondering who I am. I just had a couple of questions that you've already answered one of them, because I was sort of surprised to see just 3 risks, but I think what you're saying is these are the major risks that have been brought to this committee, and there are other lower level and operational risks sitting below this, so that's fine. Just regarding risk 1, there obviously are some, the scoring is there in place, and there are some existing controls in place. They may be having some impact, but they didn't seem to be having sufficient, well, they're not having sufficient impact to actually change the score. So I just wanted to sort of, I suppose, understand why you feel those controls are not having sufficient impact. And there are some further actions out there proposed and planned which I suppose I was interested in your view as to what extent those further actions, if successful, would reduce the score, and would that then bring the scoring within risk appetite? So just what the future might hold, I suppose, in terms of the ongoing activity.
Yeah, good evening, Martin. Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and it's one that I was actually briefing the Cabinet on at Leaders Brief today in relation to our budget, because the external placement budget is a national issue. And the Competition and Markets Authority have been actually doing a full well, not a full investigation, but an investigation into this situation. And Josh McAllister is undertaking a review of children's social care at the moment that will report into the spring. And he's also considering the situation of placement availability in place under pressure. It's always been under pressure, but it is even more so for the reasons I've explained in the risk register. We have put all of those actions in place, but the budget, particularly from the it's just saying my internet connection is unstable. If it continues, let me know and I'll just go on to voice only. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can. Okay, I'll continue. Yeah, the outturn figure from Q2 to Q3 showed a significant and increasing overspend, particularly around external residential placements. We have got the investment of 1.57 million agreed by the council to develop 2 more children's homes of our own, which would ameliorate some of the pressure, but not all of the pressure, given the number of children that we've got outside Calderdale at the moment and the cost of those placements. We will always have a number of children who can't be looked after in the borough because they have specialist need. So I think we can offset some of the risk, but not all of the risk in terms of the costs. It is it's a budget that's been overspent, stubbornly overspent in many councils, and we have done some benchmarking as well about where Calderdale sits with other local authorities, particularly within the region, and we're all everybody has a significant overspend, and we're looking at, you know, kind of what the particular needs of those children are and whether we can do something more regionally, for example, with the White Rose framework. So in a nutshell, no, I don't think the actions that we've got can completely ameliorate the level of risk that's there on the cost at the moment. So you mean the risk would remain outside of the appetite that the council has, so you're not able to actually bring it within appetite? I suppose that there might still be residual risk, but that might be accepted as being the best case possible, if you like. Yeah, in an ideal world, we'd want to safely bring down the number of looked after children requiring placements, and we do have a really strong, robust system around bringing the right children into care. Our numbers of children in care have remained relatively stable against a backdrop of increasing numbers across the country. So we have between 340 and 350 children in care. But what we do know in that cohort is that we are, like all authorities, seeing more risk and vulnerability for adolescents. And it is difficult to find foster placements for adolescents. And by default, children are going into residential care, which is quite expensive, with a shortage of foster carers coming through. So I do think those residual risks will remain, whilst ever that is a system problem. Right. Okay. It's not a council specific problem, is essentially what you're saying. It's It's a societal problem.
Societal problem, right? That's
Yeah,
fine.
well, it is. It's
Yeah.
we are much more attuned to the levels of risk to adolescents compared to how we were. If you think about child sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation, gangs, in terms of the risk to teenagers and society's awareness of those risks, previously, I think young people would have been left more to basically to get on with it in the community, and councils and services, the police, health services, are much more attuned to the risk and the damage that it does to young people, to their development, to their outcomes and to their emotional well-being. And I think there are a lot more older children in care now due to those societal changes than there were before.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks very much. I mean, to some extent, it's the challenge of being better at risk management, really, or identification of risk.
Yes.
The more risks you identify, the more you've got to try to resolve.
Yes. Yeah. The better you are at spotting the signs, the more the more intervention is required.
Yeah. In the past, possibly, I was going to say ignorance is bliss. That's probably not quite the right phrase in this context, but yeah. Okay. Thanks very much.
Any other questions or observations? Yes, Jane.
Question really of the times we're in sort of not quite finished with the COVID pandemic, of in terms of understanding the risk register, in terms of the key risks, can you separate out any of the things that are particular artifacts of COVID? Other things that are COVID related that you think in 6 months' time might get better. Can you unpick that from the general risks? That so I'm not being very clear. I was thinking of things like fostering places for teenagers and so on, teenagers coming into the system. Are there things that you can see that are going to get better because COVID is diminishing in society?
Potentially, yes. I was talking earlier on today, wasn't I, about the change in patterns within families and families wanting to look after older relatives actually in the house and taking up that spare bedroom and the impact it's had on fostering. So once COVID becomes normalised and hopefully there are no new strains and variants, people may get back to some of the ways of working and some of the family life patterns that we saw before. I think in the education risk itself, it's pretty clear that a lot of those demands, not all of them, but some of them are definitely due to COVID in terms of emotional well-being and educational recovery. And they're quite, there is an education recovery plan that we have in place, working closely with the schools around all those different strands. So they're very easy to identify. I think in social care, it's a little bit more hidden and maybe not as explicit in the risk register, but that's something we could monitor, Councillor Scullion, through the risk management process.
Sylvia, would you like to come in?
Do you want Councillor Baker to go first since he's a member of the board?
Councillor Baker, then.
I can do, thanks. Yeah, I guess when I first looked at it, I thought some of my thoughts were a bit like Martin's, that there weren't that many risks on it, and I was kind of not quite sure, what you deem more an operational risk and what are the kind of directorate-wide ones. And then I was kind of thinking, some of the stuff on here is obviously kind of sector-wide stuff that's affecting children's services, such as the rising costs of placement. But then I was kind of thinking, well, there's other things affecting the children's services across the country. There's that constant risk of having a negative serious case review and that causing institutional reputational damage. I mean, all these things that I'm sure keep you awake at night, Julie. But yeah, then there's the stuff around the kind of the CAMS waiting lists and rating lists that parents have to go for assessments, and then the impact on children not getting the proper mental health interventions. There's the ongoing risk of child sexual exploitation and grooming gangs. There's the problems with kind of retention and recruitment of social workers. So I wondered really where those types of risks would fit in. Does that all fall under the more operational stuff? Because some of that to me seemed more kind of, kind of strategic and directorate wide rather than just applying to an individual case or an individual children's home.
Just to pick up on a couple of the examples that you've chosen there, Councillor Baker, if we look at the CAMS situation, it comes under two areas for us. One is around, if you can remember, the SEND inspections, special educational needs in 2019 highlighted that particularly the waiting list for autism assessments, wheelchairs was picked up as well, was an issue for us and a recommendation. So there was a service improvement plan that was put into place, and particularly around the waiting list issue, this is something that's monitored by the Open Minds Partnership, a multi-agency partnership that's chaired by the CCG. So some of those risks that you're identifying, those big system pressures, if you like, that are there for us and other people, are very much monitored and overseen on a multi-agency basis, with updates, for example, on the Open Minds work to the Health and Wellbeing Board and to Children's Scrutiny. So it kind of, that's just one example of kind of, where the risk has been seen, where it's been managed within an improvement agenda, where it sits now in terms of the strategic framework, and where it reports to in terms of political assurance to yourselves that, what the situation is, particularly for the CCG on the waiting list issue that was making some progress. And then like many things with COVID, took a bit of a dip again as well. So I suppose that's just one example of how things are kind of managed within the frameworks, the improvement plans, the political reporting, etc., within the service, and the kind of risk to young people and those identified risks. If I just take another one as an example about child exploitation, as you can imagine, once that knowledge of child sexual exploitation, child exploitation was really understood within the partnership, there are, a multitude of meetings, intelligence sharing, strategies, documents, the work of the Safeguarding Board, all of that gets pulled together into the annual Safeguarding Assurance Report that it comes to scrutiny, it comes to Health and Wellbeing Board. There's a senior high-level meeting with the Chief Constable and Robin Tudner, the accountable officers for the 3 statutory partners. So a lot of our day-to-day work is very much embedded in improvement, assurance, auditing work from the Safeguarding Partnership, pulled all together in the annual report that's in the public domain. So we're not repeating in our risks. All those risks are being managed, in terms of a quality assurance framework, being managed so thoroughly and reported to yourselves in different arenas. We are not including those levels of risk that are being managed operationally, exploitation, through the Safeguarding Board and to yourselves.
Okay, thank you.
Sylvia, do you want to come in now?
Thank you, Chair. So I was just wanting to move on to the increased demand for education service risk, and further on down there in your controls, you refer to managed moves for children, and then later on you're talking about wicked issues sessions. I mean, again, just referring back to when you spoke to us earlier on, is that the wicked issues session that you were talking to us about? And could you, I think it might perhaps people might be interested to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Yes, absolutely. We've become aware that our levels of exclusion from school, there's 2 types of exclusion for young people in school. One is a fixed term exclusion, a short sharp shock, if you like, for something that's happened, where young people have a number of days out and come back. And then there are permanent exclusions, where children are not coming back to that school, or very unlikely to come back to the school. And in 1920, we were in line with other people around our exclusion figures. But in the last year, from 20 to 21, our exclusion figure is higher than our comparator areas. So what we've done is asked for an external consultant to come in who is an expert on the educational system, because clearly you have to have a lot of knowledge, but you also have to have the buy-in and the respect of the schools to undertake a piece of work like this. And he has come in, commissioned by Leslie Bowyer, our Assistant Director for Education, and done a full review of the system around exclusion and inclusion, and looking at the use of the pupil referral unit, where young people go if they move from a school and are permanently excluded. He has finished the work, and we took the work in January, and it did happen. It went to what we call a wicked issues session, which is where we bring the whole partnership together. So there were a lot of people in the virtual room, including a lot of the head teachers, the governors, all of our partners, to actually hear his feedback, which was a real deep dive into every part of the system and what happens in Calderdale. The conclusion of that is that Calderdale schools are not as inclusive as they could be. So there was a challenge there to the education system to say we really need to work on this together. It is a hearts and minds issue around having a much more inclusive approach, because what we do in Calderdale is we have a managed move system where if a young person is likely to be excluded, they will be moved, a planned move to another school, but there are a lot of in-year moves. So there's a number of young people that are being moved from education provision to education provision. That's not good for them. And we want local schools for local children, just as we want local care for local children. So we've got the outcome of the consultants' report. We have shared that with the head teachers. There'll be much more work to do on this in terms of action planning, looking at the whole system we've got around exclusions, but I think there is a willingness there. And we did hear from a young person herself who had gone to the PRU and was actually apprenticed now at the PRU about her experiences, what it feels like to be in that system and to be rejected with many school exclusions. And when you've moved 5-6 times, your chance of having a successful school placement diminishes considerably. So it is an important piece of work. So we've just had the feedback. We've got a very detailed report and recommendations that we'll be talking through with the chairs of the secondary head and the primary head partnerships in particular, and then taking that work forward. Thank you.
Any further questions or observations? We all okay with that? I'd just like to say, I think we have an excellent team with Julie and her team. I think their biggest pressures is always the financial aspects of it and keeping that control there, which I think they do an excellent job for, and while still maintaining that our young people are safe. So thanks for that, Julie. So we just have to, are we happy with the report? Everybody's okay with that? Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to item 6, Lisa, the selected internal audit report.
Thank you, Councillor Baines. Lachlan will present this, and we've got Sheila here as well for this item.
Thank you. Yeah, this audit, it concentrated on the governance arrangements surrounding town boards. So we're really involved considering whether there were terms reference to the boards, meetings which had publicly available minutes, facilities for declaring interest, procedures for making appointments to the boards, and roles and responsibilities in relation to the boards. We also took an example of expenditure to make sure it was legitimate and had board approval. The main concerns, as detailed in the report, was that related to the availability of meeting minutes, declaration of interests, and appointments to the board. So overall, there was a need for greater openness and transparency in relation to the boards. So overall, the opinion was limited assurance. This was upgraded to reasonable at the time of the follow-up audit because there was significant improvement, but there were a few outstanding recommendations which had not been fully implemented. As Lisa said, the director is here tonight if members have any questions.
Yes, Ashley. You're on.
Again, I'm doing it again. My apologies. Yes, and I noted on the report that there are a number of items which are not implemented or only partially implemented. What happens about those? Do they get followed up? Do they are they required to happen, or is it they're just forgotten about?
No, we will follow those up in 3 months' time to make sure they have been implemented.
Right.
And that good. Based on a paper follow-up.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, Martin.
No, just thank you, Chair. On that same point, essentially, it wasn't clear to me from reading the report why those agreed actions had not been completed. There didn't seem to be any. I mean, I'm not actually doing the piece of work for any of them, but they all seem to be relatively straightforward things to get in place. So I wasn't really sure why they'd not been completed by the agreed date. But I think those numbers 4, 6, and 8.
Good evening, Chair. Would you like me to respond to that?
I assume you said yes, but you may have said no. Yeah.
I didn't want to presume. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Chair. My name is Sheila O'Neill, Director of Regeneration and Strategy. So I'll answer your observation there, Martin. The reason is really down to resources. So I think what you see through this audit report is an improving position coming from quite a low base. But I think the work that we've been undertaking in the last 12 months has been about bringing consistency to the boards and addressing the administrative shortfalls. We didn't have consistent administration across the boards, and we weren't getting the basic housekeeping issues right, which I think is what the original audit had picked up. So we have been working through these, and some of them seem like quite straightforward actions, but actually require other people to do things, which sometimes they do at different paces. And just to bear in mind that the members of the board are not all members of council staff or members of the council. They are individuals who've got other jobs and work to do, and they're doing this in their spare time. And so as part of that, introducing the consistency and the approach that we want each of the boards to maintain, we have developed formal processes. And the deadline we've given for the introduction, for example, for the declaration of interest is the end of this financial year, so that from next financial year onwards, we will do that on a rolling basis so that everybody will have that opportunity to declare their declaration of interest, and that will be a condition of participating in the board within the terms of reference. So I'm happy to go through those recommendations, if you like, in terms of the ones that have not been implemented. So number 4, if it's helpful, Chair, is the minutes. That feels like one that should be quite straightforward. In actual fact, there are issues about accessibility in terms of the format in which they need to be uploaded. We have provided all of the minutes, and they are now uploaded onto the council's website or to the town board's websites, apart from the Halifax minutes, and that's because there isn't a dedicated space to the Halifax Town Board, so that will be rectified as soon as we have that available. So we are reliant on our colleagues in information technology, our IT support services, to facilitate that for us. So they've done a rapid piece of work to get those up wherever we can, posted onto the website. So that actually is now almost fully implemented, just with Halifax outstanding. In terms of the partial implementation, number 6 is the declaration of interest, which I've referred to, and number 8 is the financial ledger. That's work that we're undertaking with colleagues in financial services at the moment. There is a lead finance officer who works across the programme boards and authorises the expenditure and reports and so on, but there is recruitment underway at the moment to bring additional dedicated resource. I think, in all honesty, what has happened in the last 18 months has been that the work of the boards has expanded so rapidly that it's just been very challenging to move at that same pace. And I'm not seeking to give excuses for the delays in the implementation or some of the weaknesses that were found. But I think the prioritisation for the town board's perspective was about securing the funds that were available. And we are now looking to put in place all of the governance that you would expect to see and those safeguards. And I hope, with support of Lisa and the team in Lachlan, who've been very helpful and constructive colleagues in HR and IT and finance, we're well on the way. The other thing, just to give some comfort and confidence around that, is when I arrived here last year, there was not a senior responsible officer within my directorate for each of those boards. We now have that. So there are other colleagues from other directorates who do attend, but what I now have within my management team is somebody who acts as the eyes and ears, is able to help inform the board about activities in other areas, but is also crucially able to bring information back so we can triangulate, make sure we catch things early, make sure that we're supporting the board to be efficient and effective.
Okay. Chair, could I just come back on? Thanks very much for that explanation. Just further, sort of couple of observations. I think, like number 4, I mean, I appreciate And I agree with what you said. It's always tricky to get other people to do things. Often easier just to simply do it yourself, isn't it? But trying to influence others to do things is tricky. But I suppose it wasn't clear to me from the report that, I mean, the boards had been reminded to do something, but I wasn't sure whether the responsible officer had sort of followed that up. And I mean, if I knew internal audit were going to visit again, I'd have followed up to, if I was the responsible officer, I'd made sure that I'd checked whether the boards had done what they're supposed to be doing before Lisa's team turned up again. So that was, I don't know, seemed a bit surprising that that hadn't happened. And I think maybe, I don't know if we've said this before, but if it's, well, maybe the scope and, as you say, the work has changed. So perhaps the original date was appropriate, and maybe it's sort of a, had you known the work that was involved, you might have set a later date. But I think, and Lisa, I'm sure would agree, it's always better to set a later date that you feel you can deliver against, and then we're not having, I suppose, audit finding things have not been delivered. Better for them to go back and find everything has been completed by agreed dates. So I think it's always subject to obviously negotiating that with the audit team. Better to go to allow a bit more time if they're prepared to grant that, I suppose. And they're not always that generous, are they? I suppose, but better to do that than to not complete everything. And then I suppose just final thought. I mean, I think maybe, I don't know if it's Lisa. Is this your report? It's produced by your team. The update.
Yes, I can confirm it is. Yeah.
I just thought, I think, I mean, maybe it's just a question for clarity, just about explaining why something's not been implemented. Because I mean, it just wasn't, I suppose I'd expect to read this and to be clear, to be read. I shouldn't need to have all the background to it. So it should sort of feel the paper should speak for itself. And if it's not been implemented because it's a resource issue or because the scope's been extended, then that would be helpful to include that in the report, I suppose.
Okay.
Right. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. May I just respond?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I think your point's absolutely valid, Martin. And I think by way of explanation, I joined at the end of January last year, and we had some very pressing deadlines across the boards. There was a senior assistant director vacant post within the service that is responsible for this work area. So the prioritisation really was very much on getting the work done at the expense of some of the governance actions. And that's just by way of explanation. I think one of the things that we have done is that the boards are, by their very nature, very different. They have very different characteristics, very different approaches, and that's part of their strengths. But with that becomes the challenge of bringing that consistency. So one of the things we are doing alongside that, making sure we've got that consistent attendance from the directorate, is reminding people of the roles and responsibilities, reminding them of the governance requirements, both of the council as accountable body and as the lead authority, but also of them as individuals signing up to participate in the board. And so we've done things like share the Nolan principles and explain why it's important that we have declarations of interest, what it means to be on a board that's publicly accountable, what it means to be responsible for the allocation of funds and the management of projects and delivery of outcomes. So we are I absolutely am convinced that by this time next year or within 3 months, 6 months, we'll see a very different picture. We are at the moment recruiting for a new towns manager. So it has been a very volatile period, I think, for the teams that have been involved. And I think we hope to stabilise and bring that consistency, as I've said.
Thanks for that. Next one, Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my original question has been mirrored by Ashley and Martin. And I also agree with Martin's last comments that I felt it was sort of incomplete, that there could have been more answers provided. It left itself open to questioning because of the missing actions. But I do accept, Sheila, your explanations are, they're irrefutable. It's been very difficult. Everything happened quickly. But I do want to point out, Chair, that the difference now between now and when we looked at this situation is that the money's arrived. And that changes things very much indeed, in my view. So I'd like to see, and I can see Nigel smiling, But the money does change things. Millions of pounds are coming into Calderdale, and we celebrate that. But I would like to see some conclusions that will accelerate progress with this, if possible, Sheila, and get everything in place, because it's very important now. There's huge amounts of money involved, and we want to get all of the control systems spot on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Am I all right to respond, Chair?
Yes, yes.
I think one of the challenges, Councillor Lee, has been that when the town boards were set up and then when the funds were applied for, the resourcing level was dependent on the securing of the capital funds. And so we were really very much operating on a shoestring. And I think that one of the things I've talked about with the team is undertaking a lessons learned, which is not so much about that audit and governance process, but about some of the things as an organisation we need to think about to put in place to give that stable base to start from, because we have had to do a lot of catching up, and I think that's been quite challenging. But absolutely, we will get there, and that, you know, the support of our colleagues has been absolutely critical to the work we've done so far.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, I mean, I just really want to echo how important it is to get this right. You know, these aren't small little community groups piddling about with a few £1,000s. We're talking about like multi-million-pound deals here with huge amounts of public resources going through them, and unfortunately there is potential of any amount of money like that you have to get the governance actually absolutely right on it, and with that large power comes that responsibility to get the governance spot on. So we shouldn't be in a situation where, you know, following an audit review, we've still got things like minutes not being published, we don't know the financial declarations, and it's going to be even more important. Okay, we've got the spending money, but we've already missed a bit where people have been developing these projects and putting them forward. So it's, you know, I think it's a lesson for all of us involved in the public sector going forward. You know, bringing other people into decision making can have potential benefits, but with it becomes additional risks when you're putting people in those positions of a large amount of responsibility where they're not necessarily democratically accountable to the electorate, and they aren't necessarily in the same way council employees that have that, all those kind of like controls and balances that come with it. You know, as councillors, we all have to do our declarations of interest, declare them at every meeting. It's all entirely transparent, and I'd expect decision-making bodies like this to have that same level of transparency and openness. So absolutely, you know, we just have to get this right, and hopefully, you know, if it comes back to audit committee next time, I would like us to do another follow-up on this, that all of those issues are then resolved.
Sylvia, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. Well, I just wanted to speak really, as much as anything, in support of Sheila, who really did have to come in and I suppose in a way have to sort this out, because just the staffing that had been in place at the director and assistant director level to support, for instance, the Tottenham Brighouse plans just wasn't really there at the time that they started off, which made it very difficult. And of course, also the fact that those two boards in particular had to set off in the middle of COVID, which just made things extremely challenging, because you've got this strange hybrid mixture of private sector chair supposed to be leading the board, yet the council, the responsible body, and all of this is going on remotely, and so very, very difficult to build relationships. And for instance, just simple things like you can't put your minutes up until the minutes are agreed, and if you can't get the minutes agreed, you're just stuck in limbo. And there've been ridiculous things like that have made for difficulties, certainly with those two boards. And things like, and as has been mentioned by Sheila, the members of the board are there are councillors there, but primarily they are people from outside who are doing it as volunteers. The whole of the Nolan principles is alien to many of them. We struggled, for instance, on Tottenham board to get people to complete the register of interest. Now, I thought that people had in the end done it after a great deal of persuasion, but clearly if they were done, they haven't gone anywhere that anybody can see them. And again, I think it goes back to it's very difficult to support these things when the money hasn't come through and the council hasn't got the money to splash around on supporting something that might not come to fruition. It just makes it very challenging, and I'm sure Sheila's right that we can learn from this, and we can, if the opportunities to arise again in the future in a similar way, you'd be able to learn from what you've done. But there still is that, there's always going to be that tension between how much resource can the council put into something that might not actually get it anywhere, and that comes back to the whole way in which so much is now funded. So many capital projects are funded where people are having to put the energy into bidding for them without knowing what they're going to get out at the end of it. So it's really just a plea for Martin, for instance, who may not have had to suffer this kind of process, just to understand how challenging that sort of scheme and that sort of structure can be.
Are there any other comments or observations at all? Right. It's well, before we move on to St. Augustine's, I just feel we ought to perhaps if Lisa and Sheila can get together to look at a date in the future where it's a sensible time to bring back the report as James requested, if that could be organised for a future meeting of the Audit Committee.
Can confirm, Councillor Baines, that we will be doing the follow-up audit as we normally do with our audit protocol, and the results of that will be shown on the tracking report. Are you satisfied with that, or do you want actually a full report to come back at a future time?
Yeah, I would be happy with that, but what about James? Are you happy with that, James?
I think so. Perhaps if Lisa, you could then just give like an oral kind of update when we come to that tracking report once it's been done, and then if there's a chance to ask questions, we can do. I think that would then be sufficient.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and feedback.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. So are we happy to move on to St. Augustine's now? Are there any comments or observations there? Councillor Lee, Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, on St. Augustine's, I just want to say that I found it quite alarming. The work that's been done by Audit has been very, very good, as one would expect. But there was quite a list of things. You know, I kind of marked all the 4.1 and 5.1, A2F and A2H. There were significant things that the Audit Department has found, and that's great because that's what the audit job's all about. But on the basis that this is one school of very many schools, I'm quite alarmed at, you know, how widespread this sort of lack of control and the need for audits elsewhere might be. You know, there's a lot of schools in Calderdale. One was chosen and there was a lot wrong, and the audit has found out these points to be addressed. And I just wonder, maybe ask Lisa now, you know, whether there's a feeling that there's a lot more that could be uncovered if we extended our researches further and try to feel some reassurance. You know, it would be reassuring if this was a one-off, but I suspect that if there's 30 schools or 40 schools that we've got to look at, there might be a repetition of what we've found here. So don't know what you think about that, Lisa.
Yeah, well, we can only go to the schools if the schools appoint us as their external auditor. You know, they are independent from the council, basically, of the schools, and it's their choice. You know, so it's. Do you have any comments, Lisa?
We do go to all of our maintained schools. We've got a risk-based programme where all the schools are included, and we, as I say, we've got a risk-based approach to which schools we do in any given year. We would go to them all every 4 years, but we would prioritise in terms of a risk assessment if we had any other intelligence to indicate that there may be issues at that school. That is things like changes in school business managers. We send out schools' financial value statements each year, and if there were any issues on there which internal audit collate, we would target them to go out to that school. We also do some themed audit work where we ask various questions on various issues where we may feel as though there's issues within schools, and that would be escalated and targeted to all schools. So we do have quite an extensive programme of auditing schools. We also liaise with other finance colleagues to identify whether there's any budget pressures within particular schools. But we do get around all schools every 4 years.
Right. Any other comments or observations?
Yes, yes, Chair. So I've just got my virtual hand up, if that's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, like Councillor Lee, I don't think we don't have many of the reports come to audit on schools. There was another one which I think we had in we closed the session to discuss it because it wasn't a very good report at all. But I guess, like Councillor Lee, I kind of worry if this is symptomatic of wider kind of standards within schools, and whether there's something else we need to do in terms of whether there's common trends that you've noticed, Lisa, or whether there's something else that can be done in terms of CPD with schools or training of governors to kind of improve the awareness of some of the kind of common governance issues that are coming up within schools at the moment. I mean, perhaps you know a little bit more about what work does go on in that area, and whether you feel there is a need perhaps for us to do more as a LEA.
Thank you, Councillor Baker. You'll see from the tracking report that generally school audits do get a substantial assurance, which we report at each meeting. That's the position. And, you know, we get assurances from the school that they have addressed the recommendations that have been made. We are, as with any audit, alert to whether there are any common issues, and that may be a reason for us to do a themed audit if we identified that there were same issues were coming out from a number of schools. And that would mean that we would then do a more of a deep dive into that specific area. And we use various methods then for communicating out to all schools, whatever means that may be. We've also provided training to governors and head teachers and school business managers as part of work that other teams within the local authority are part of. So yes, we do look at themes, we do look to see if there's anything going wrong, and the SFVS forms do give us that indication as well, if there are some gaps. I know Lachlan might be able to expand a little bit further on terms of some training that one of our auditors have done recently that was really well received. Lachlan, do you want to come in there?
Yes, it was the governor liaison officer. She asked us if we would provide some training to governors, and I think all the governors of all Calderdale's maintained schools were offered this training, and I think there was only about 15 turned up for the training, but they were all very pleased with it, and the feedback forms are very good. So she's asked us to repeat the training next year, and hopefully we'll get more governors at that training. But yeah, I think it would be a good idea for more of those sort of events.
Great, thank you.
Right. Any other comments or observations? Right. So move that we note the report and move on to the council's cyber security arrangements. Martin, are you coming in for this one?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The report brought to the Audit Committee tonight is an update report on cyber security arrangements within the council. Cyber security is in the top 5 of virtually everybody's risk registers, risk arrangements, because no matter whether you're a local authority, whether you're a private sector organisation, cyber risk is one of the biggest and increasing risks to people's organizations there is. However, cyber risk is probably also one of the most difficult ones to manage because it's not obvious where your next attack is going to come or where the trigger is going to be. There are many different ways to have a cyber attack on your authority, and how it arrives, we've outlined one or two of the methods within the report, but there's no guarantee, and you're only one step ahead of the hackers, and they obviously spend all their time searching for ways to get in. In fact, Google has just had to announce, I think today, that hackers found a backdoor into one of their programs. So anybody who uses the program that was done by Google is at risk of being hacked until they can get a patch on it within the next couple of days. So all the time people are doing this. And the idea of getting into it at a back door is, in actual fact, rather than fighting your way through the front, you use somebody else's security failure to come in and put something into the existing information in the organization. So they're much more simple and less easy to spot than a straightforward attack against the firewall. If you really wanted to attack somewhere, it's not difficult. You can actually go on the dark web and buy a hacking kit for 20 quid. And in actual fact, they've got helplines on some of them in case you can't quite understand it. So it's not difficult. I'm not getting on the dark web is, but once you're there, very, very simple. And that they are people, and people will highlight which backdoors they found in people's organizations. In actual fact, some hackers now don't bother hacking anymore. What they do is they simply take money from other people who buy their hacking kits. So obviously it's a massive industry. So the concern is really is where the next attack will come from. And obviously most of the attacks that we get come through emails. As you saw from the attacks report, the number of emails that we actually stop as it come through the council in Appendix A is phenomenal. There are hundreds and hundreds each day. And over a 5-week period, we had a significant number. One of the things on those reports, the log reports that we're looking at doing, is actually monitoring how these reports are made up. Because on one of them, it's interesting to notice that on viruses, for 4 of the weeks, there was very few. And then suddenly on week 5, it went from 161 to 731. And we need to find out whether that is a concerted attack or that was just somebody who thought they'd found a way of getting in. So monitoring the number of potential emails that come through is very important. And in actual fact, this evening, an email has gone out from the cybersecurity officer reminding people yet again, please make sure when you're looking at an email to make sure it isn't something dodgy. It might well have the words NHS and all the correct logos on it, telling you how to apply for your COVID pass. But I can assure you, if it asks you for money, it isn't. They're simply either asking you to hand over your bank details or to give your organizational password so that they can break into your company. The cost of these cyber attacks are really quite bad. You may have read in the papers that Oxford had a recent cyber attack when it took all their online services down. They're going to be down for probably a month, maybe a month and a half, which means that absolutely no emails can go out of Oxford to anybody because everybody else is blocking them because they've had the attack. And Oxford has had to set aside £380,000 from resources to actually pay for the cost of bringing the information back online again. I'm saying, but it'll be difficult to book your next sports session at the moment because all the systems are down. Part of the future work is actually looking at the information from the firewall logging systems, as I said. And this is key, actually, identifying where the potential future attacks are coming and if there's new areas of attack. So it's absolutely key that we monitor this information as it comes through. And it's actually spotting the spikes and the differences and the peaks and the troughs as areas come through. So in summary, it's a difficult area. We are one step ahead of the hacker, but tomorrow somebody could click on a mouse and they could get into the system. And that's the same, not just for us, but any organization. Anyway, at that point, I'll stop and ask if anyone's got any questions or require any further information. Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to make the point, if I remember correctly, I think it was compulsory that certainly all elected members had to go through the training for this. Was that the case?
It was. It was mandatory, and everyone who was made to do it, in actual fact, you were blocked out. If you hadn't completed in a certain length of time, you would have been blocked out of the system and not allowed in until you'd actually completed the the training. So yes, everyone will have taken it.
Yeah, that's one step in the right direction, which you've introduced then, Martin. Stephen, would you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Martin, I've discussed that in another meeting. I don't know if it was a scrutiny meeting maybe, but as the Chair's just said, that training session, which was compulsory for members, was very good. And I think in view of the nature of this problem, which is getting bigger every year, I certainly think that the council should consider doing the same thing again, only a bit more difficult than the first one, so that we're truly on the ball. But the main point I wanted to ask about here is the recovery situation, the backup and recovery position, which is mentioned in the report, and it's highlighted as a very significant thing that we need to be thinking about. And I know in many companies, they have a backup resilience plan, but often when something does happen to a company, their backup resilience plan proves to be wanting. And this is such a complex organisation with so many interactions between staff and with the public on many occasions. I think we should really concentrate on having a look at just what our backup and resilience and plan B situations are throughout the council, because if we're unlucky and somebody does hit us really badly, the consequences could be disastrous, as I think is pointed out in the report. But I definitely agree with that observation, Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Can I just go in at this point? Yes, we're looking at what they call the immutable backups, which basically are those that are remote from the main system, so they're not affected. They may well be 2 weeks out of date, but I can assure you that bringing information back, which is a blueprint for starting it all again, with 2 weeks of information missing, is completely different to Redcar, who had to put it all in from scratch. So we've got those, and also we're looking at having backups into the cloud, so that they're again, they're remote from the system. But I can assure you, yes, the cyber security officer has that very high on her list of priorities.
Thank you for that. Martin, did you want to comment?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I just wanted, Martin, I just wanted to ask about, obviously in section 5 is the work programme that's been developed. So I was just wondering, I suppose, how that's been, what's informed that, and where the areas for improvement have been identified. So as in the document, there's a couple of, if you like, reference points. There's the NAO's recommendations and then the NCSC's guidance as well. So I was just wondering whether there'd been the council's current arrangements have been mapped against those recommendations, if you like, of good practice to see how well they match. And then I was thinking about other things like benchmarking or collaboration with other, well, I was going to say public sector bodies or other councils, but as you say, it could be private sector as well. So it's not it's not a particular industry issue, this. So so just that sort of benchmarking and collaboration, and then also whether there was any view or intention to bring in, if you like, an independent expert in this field to review the council's arrangements. I mean, maybe that would be in due course once further work had been done. So I was assuming that internal audit wouldn't have the technical competence to sort of do that piece of work, so it would need to be an independent expert, if there is such a thing, because this is all very new, isn't it? So probably some people claim to be experts when they've got very limited experience themselves. But so I think it was really that, just about how the actual programme of work has been developed and identified.
Right. Okay. Well, obviously, yes, we understand about the National Audit Office and the National Centre for Cyber Security. We've got both those reports, and whilst they're not bedside reading, we're certainly very familiar with them, so they've been used as a reference point. However, setting up the section 5, which is the way forward, was a meeting between myself, the cybersecurity officer, the lead for IT, and the lead for digital transformation. And what we've looked at there is we started at where we were at the beginning, what we had now, and where we wanted to be to actually be able to provide a service which could be restarted within a couple of days, not the couple of months it takes normally to restart something. So those are some of the things there, are the proposals we would have to put in place and work with those. So it was a group, really a group effort. But the cybersecurity officer is the key link in this, because as you talked about collaboration, that there's nobody, I don't think, in the cyber world that she doesn't know. And she works with the National Cybersecurity Office. She works with other people in other authorities, and she also works closely with people who produce the software and the firewall software to make sure that we've got the latest versions and everything. The difficulty with benchmarking, I understand that it's useful to see what other people have got in place, but councils use different software. There's so many different versions of spyware that they're all slightly different, and all councils have some form of different management of their systems. But it would be useful to find out what other people are doing, and if they've got really good ideas to borrow some of those. But again, the cybersecurity officer has a good knowledge of what is out there and what is happening, because she talks to a lot of other people. I'm sorry, your third point I've forgotten.
It was regarding an independent view of some experts.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, the report went to, we have the senior auditor, the one that manages the IT, has a very good knowledge of cybersecurity, and we used him as a sounding board for the report to make sure that it was correct in what we were saying, and that he was okay with that. Certainly, I think as we get further into where we're going, we need to maybe look at having an external viewpoint, and I'll talk to the Director of Public Services as ICT and cybersecurity as part of her remit to get a view from her as to what she wants to do about it.
Okay, fine. I just have one further specific. Sorry, if I can just do that. About the exercises with about phishing, I think, in terms of staff exercise to see whether people actually respond to these emails. I just wondered what the results of those exercises have been, and whether you're seeing an improving trend over time.
Yeah, there has been, yes. We've obviously reduced the number of people who are unaware of being a suspicious email. The last one, which went out just at the start of COVID, was perhaps not showing another reducing trend, and this is because we felt there was difficulty with people. They weren't working in an office, so they couldn't say, this looks a bit dodgy, have you seen one of these before? Or they hadn't got the ability to talk to a neighbour or a friend or their colleagues or their line manager and ask about it. So therefore, one or two people may have opened it without realising it. Secondly, there were a lot of emails going around at the time which were saying from the NHS, from various other bodies, and the people who were phishing actually do very, very good work because of that. And people were getting confused as to what was potentially a phishing email and what wasn't. It wasn't a high number, but it was certainly, it didn't show a continuing trend downwards because of the isolation of home working.
Okay, thank you.
Sylvia, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Well, the first thing I'd say is that one thing about the council's phishing emails is they're much better than my former employers, which you could spot a mile off, and therefore were really worthless. Whereas, unfortunately, the last one that the council did, I thought was very effective. So I'm Martin, just to let you know, I'm cabinet member for resources, which includes IT and cybersecurity. And when you ask about what do they keep up with, I try to read things that I see in the general the things that we subscribe to, public service, executive magazines and things like that. When there's something about IT or cybersecurity, I try my best to read it, and then will often trot off to my liaison meetings with IT. I'll say, oh, well, I read this article about X, and invariably they have already, they know exactly what I'm talking about, that they do very well at keeping up with all of the developments, and but they find it very stressful because they know that there are so many threats, and that's partly why we're trying to invest more people into that, because the lady who's in charge of it does an incredibly good job, but it needs more than one person, because it needs more people to keep abreast of all the different developments that there are, the different ways of being attacked. And so she really does need that help. And I think that's got to be good for us. And I would say, in relation to Councillor Lee, I do understand what you're saying about people think they've put plans in place and then they don't work. And what I'd say is that if you look at paragraph 5, the council's trying really hard not to put all its eggs in one basket. There's lots of different ways of approaching this. And not only are the different ways of trying to approach it, but there's also a big emphasis on what to do if the worst happens and how do we recover, and and it talks about deciding on which were the priority services and which do we have to put the real effort into, deciding how we're going to get those back up and running as quickly as possible if the worst did happen. So I think it's quite reassuring that they're looking at it as in a wider way as possible. So I think those were the points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dicker.
Any other comments or observations? Right, well, we have to note the report. So I do that, and thank Martin for his, once again, excellent report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Are we all in favour of that? Yeah. Okay. So we move on to the SIP Financial Management Code. Nigel, are you dealing with this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just briefly then, in terms of introduction, the SIPFA new Financial Management Code came in this year. Audit committees received a couple of reports prior to introduction explaining exactly what the code was designed to do, and then a first monitoring report I think it was early last year. So this report really is just an update on the current position. Now, in the appendix, it sets out a whole series of things, and in effect, they're RAG rated. There do appear to be a number of things that are still ongoing. But what I'd probably say to that is things like briefing members on resilience, things like budget challenge sessions. So those processes are in place, but really this is just pointing out that actually they're ongoing processes that should be done and repeated on a regular basis. So it's difficult to say when are those actually completed, because it will be a continuous process. As I say, it looks like there's quite a lot in the appendix that's still to do, but actually there are 17 standards in the Financial Management Code with lots of questions and criteria below that, most of which we meet. And in fact, if I think I was asked at the moment whether we meet the Financial Management Code, I think I would say yes, quite categorically. What's highlighted in the report is where I think actually there's scope for further improvement. And actually, in terms of do we meet the criteria, well, actually we've set up across West Yorkshire to do some peer reviews of each other, just to check that that there's an independent view, if you like, similar to what we had earlier this evening from Martin Durnley from Kirklees. Repeat that process really on the Financial Management Code, just to get another view on whether we actually meet it. So the areas that I'll probably pick out in terms of potential areas still for improvement in the report, if I can just give some examples. One is there's a series of actions about resilience of the finance service, because one of the criteria is about having a fit for purpose finance service. I believe that is at the moment, but there are challenges in terms of recruitment and retention, and that's not specific to Calderdale, it's across the profession at the moment. So we've been doing a lot of work with the workforce development team within HR around training for individuals within the existing service, backup for particular areas that are quite specialist, so that we're not reliant upon one person, and also bringing in new people and setting up training plans for those people. So there's a lot of work that's been ongoing and will continue with workforce development. The second issue I'll probably pick up on is around reviewing the skill sets of officers and members. I've done quite a lot of kind of set piece training events over the last few years. I think in hindsight, what I probably want to do maybe in future is look at those again and think more about what are some of the new challenges within the finance areas, and perhaps come back to members and say, what are some of the areas that actually you'd like to know more about, rather than, as I say, the presentations I've given have been very much around the background to local government finance, but maybe moving that on and working more with members about what are the key areas that actually you think it would be good to hear more about. One of the areas that's picked up is a more consistent approach to option appraisals, which when I talk to colleagues across West Yorkshire and wider, I don't think there's anybody really bottomed. I think we do options appraisals within all our projects. Whether we could do that more consistently is, I think, a challenge to us, and something that certainly I think we should be looking to develop more. And finally, there is something about linking the strategies with the medium-term financial strategy. And by that I mean asset management strategy, HR strategy, IT strategy, etc. All those resource areas. And I think my view on that, and obviously I'll kind of listen to whether people share that view, is certainly this year when we brought forward papers on the asset side of the council in terms of what's required in terms of maintenance. We've repeated that with IT in terms of what are the IT requirements looking forward for the council, and also HR. We brought that forward all at the same time as the revenue budget and the capital strategy. So I think hopefully members have recognised the fact that we tried to link those strategies by bringing them all together at the same time, so members can see hopefully how they fit together. But there's obviously quite a lot in the appendix, so I'll just pause there and just invite questions if that's okay.
Are there any questions or observations anybody would like to make? Yes, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Nigel. Just a couple of quick ones, really. I sort of feel that you're doing yourself a bit of a disservice, really, because I think some of the actions are not really open, as you explained. They're actually in place, aren't they? So I just thought you could have a third category rather than open or closed. It could be called something like in place and ongoing, or words to that effect, because it is actually underselling itself in terms of what's been achieved. So I thought that might be worth considering. And then also, I thought some of the action dates were missing, but when I read the commentary, they're actually within there. So I think it's just again, a question of just bringing them out, extracting them from the commentary and popping them into the action date column. So there was just a couple of minor sort of presentational observations.
Quite happy to pick up on those in terms of the dates, and yes, I agree. When I put together the appendix, I thought some of these things are ongoing. We've actually done quite a bit of work on them. I suppose it's partly going back to your earlier point about putting targets in there that are deliverable and achievable. I suppose I've possibly gone too far in that, but yes, I think it's a good suggestion in terms of having another category that says we've done the initial work and it will be ongoing, but we're where we should be at this moment in time. So look at how we present that in future. Yes, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. I think Nigel always does a good job. Are there any other questions or observations from anybody? No. Nigel, I know you're retiring soon. Is this your last audit committee?
It will be, yes, I'm afraid. It's I retired at the end of March, so unless there's an urgent audit committee before then it will be, yes.
I think that's highly unlikely, but
I hope so, yes.
I'd just like to thank you for your services over the years. But was it 2008? Was it when you joined us?
I think it was 2007. I think.
But 2007. Yes, yeah. So it's. But thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in your retirement. But hopefully we'll meet before you actually disappear. Okay, thanks very much for that. Thanks. And we just have to note to agree the recommendations in 3, 1, 2, and 3. And I think it's, you know, the report, you know, that we do get another report at a future date, which will be agreed in when it's ready to do so. Okay, everybody happy with that? Right. So we move on next to the progress report of the significant issues. Lisa.
Thank you, Chair. This is the usual report to update members on the position with the items included within the 2021 annual governance statement. Members will recall that there were 3 issues identified in there. There was the COVID-19 pandemic, there was financial resilience and project management. Included within the report is the comments from officers in terms of what the current position is and what future plans are. Happy to take any questions. The report is for noting, but I can take questions if members have them.
Any questions or observations? No, you've done too good a job again, Lisa. So we move on to the next one, to the internal audit, revised audit plan.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this is the usual report that we bring at this time of year, identifying the revisions that we've made to the audit plan and the reasons why we need to revise the plan in terms of the work that we set out to do at the beginning of the year. Last year, there were quite a number of audits that we needed to defer, primarily because of COVID and the work that the internal audit team were providing in supporting the delivery of those business grants. This year, there are only 4 audits that we're proposing to defer until next year, all of which will go on next year's audit plan. The reasons for those deferrals are detailed within the appendix to the report. Some of them are because of requests from services, because arrangements are in transition, or various pressures within services. Included on the appendix is also the additional work that the internal audit team have done throughout the year. So we've not been sat twiddling our thumbs. We have been doing other things that just provide assurance to you as audit committee members. I don't envisage that deferring the 4 audits that I'm proposing will present any risk. It may be that we need to defer things even further for the remaining part of the year, because as things change all the time, and there are new grants and reliefs being published at the moment, and it may be that internal audit staff are required to provide some support with those. So happy to take questions from members on the proposals.
Yeah, any questions or observations? No, so I assume we're all happy to go ahead with the plan as listed. Yeah, okay. Thanks very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
So we go on to the item 12, internal audit services tracking report.
Thank you. Again, this is the usual report which we present at each meeting, which outlines the audits we've carried out in the year to date, including where appropriate, where we've done follow-up audit work, and it indicates the position at the time of the follow-up. You will note that there are 3 new audits on the tracking report whereby internal audit have given limited assurance. Those being adult care charges, community protection and young people service. As is internal audit's normal reporting and processes, we will be doing follow-up audits on each of those audits. Often audit committee wait until those follow-up audits have been done so that we can give you assurance or otherwise that recommendations have been implemented. But happy to take members' suggestions in terms of what you'd like to see as member selected reports at the future meeting.
Right, yes, Ashley. You're on mute, Ashley.
I'm not having a good evening this evening, am I? My apologies. On looking at the list on page 97, where we're looking at recommendations and implementations, one of the weak areas appears to be on highway maintenance, where there are 6 recommendations and 2 have only been so far implemented. Is there any particular reason for that?
That's one that I have on my list to bring to the next meeting.
Right.
Do you have any comments to make on it?
Do I? Well, I'm just wondering why only 2 have been implemented out of the 6 which have been shown, and when we do have issues as councillors in relation to highways, and therefore if only 2 of them have been implemented out of 6, then what's going wrong here?
We do know the recommendations which they haven't implemented. They've provided those responses on the follow-up form, and we will be reviewing what they are. Some of those things are because, in a similar way to the town board's audit, they're awaiting approval or action by others to fully implement it. Revised targets have been given for implementation of the recommendations, which we will continue to track. But quite happy to bring that as a member selected report if that's what members would like to see.
I'd certainly be interested in that, and I think Chair has made reference to something like that as well.
Yeah, we'll just go to James first before we make any decision, just in case James has any suggestions.
No, I mean, I guess I'd like to see some of the limited ones. I mean, I know we do look at some of the better ones as well, and it's not to give a skewed representation of how things are going across the authority, but I do think there is also merit in people who've got the follow-up reports, knowing that they're also going to have to come and present to audit committee and explain themselves in front of the committee in terms of driving forward that improvement. I do think that is a useful part of our function. So I would like to see some of those also come to us in addition to the highways report.
Yeah, we do normally just keep this to just one. Usually, it's one report, and I think this is one which I'd actually highlighted for it to come back. And as you say, we do pick the good reports out as well, because it does send the message out that not everything's bad in the council. In fact, most of the reports are more than acceptable, really. So it's I think it's something right to pick on some of those occasionally.
I think we had 2 tonight, Chair, didn't we? Could we perhaps have at least 2 then come back, something else in addition to highways?
Well, we had 2 actually tonight, because we missed completely at the last meeting, and that's why we did a bit of catch up with it. But I think if you look back, it's generally just one that we go through in detail.
I think, yeah, okay. Well, my personal preference would be, depending on the workload of the meeting, as long as we can still get the business done in a reasonable time, that we would perhaps try and squeeze in another one. But, I'll leave that to other members and yourself, Chair.
Yeah, well, I think I can never judge how long the meetings are going to be. And I think I don't think any of us can do. But are the majority of members happy to proceed with just one, unless it is a very light agenda? I see a lot more nodding of heads than shaking of heads, so I think we'll just accept that we continue with just the one in future. Are there any other questions or observations that anybody would like to make? Right, so we have to approve the report and also go ahead with the highway maintenance being the subject for the next meeting. Lisa, please, thank you. Okay, we're all okay with that? Right, and the final one is the committee work plan. Are we all happy with that? Any comments? Do you want to make any comments, Lisa? Are you happy?
Just one comment, Chair, if I may. I've put as an item for the next meeting, which is the 31st of May, a report on the town centre capital project's final accounts. Just wanted other members to confirm that you're happy that that's going to be on the agenda for the next meeting, and if anybody has any comments as to what members want to see in that report, that would be useful.
Right. Well, I'm certainly happy with that. Is anybody have any objections? And if you haven't any suggestions at the moment and you want to think about it, I'm sure if you then contact Lisa, she'll incorporate it into the report.
Yes, I have put on the commentary to report on the final accounts of capital projects for Halifax Town Centre, identifying a regional forecast and outturn. So if anybody has any comments over and above that, if you could let me know.
Okay, we're all happy with that?
Yeah, I'll drop you an email, Lisa.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Just to confirm, the May meeting is quite a long agenda. There are quite a lot of reports on that agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So if everybody's okay, it's we'll close the meeting, and thank you all for your attendance and for the our team for the service which they've given us this evening.
Thanks, Chair. Good night.
Thank you,
Chair.
Right. Good night.